going to talk about taxonomy and levels of classification. We're going to start talking about some of the domains, but I think that'll make sense as we go. So let's talk about taxonomy and give a definition for that. Taxonomy is the science of classifying organisms. If I were to take, if you were to go into your room and have a bunch of laundry that's all over the floor and you needed to start organizing, it was all clean, but it was all, you needed to figure out where it goes, put it in the drawers. You had to clean your room essentially. You would probably start putting shirts together, maybe long sleeve and short sleeve separate, or maybe they're in the same drawer. You would put shorts and maybe some pants together, maybe in the same drawer, or maybe you'd put pants in the closet and shorts in a drawer, and then different types of undergarments from socks and underwear. Those would probably go together. So you have a way of classifying your clothes, and you put them in certain drawers. Hopefully you don't just take clothes and throw them into a drawer and then just search through all the drawers and not sure which drawer certain items would be in. It's easier to access if everything is classified, and that's what we're talking about here. Think about different organisms, worms and sharks and whales and birds, and getting into plants, talking about corn and sequoia trees and oak trees and all the different things. We need to be able to classify them. As in science, we need to be able to put them in a drawer, put them in a group. And so that's what taxonomy is. This is a science of classifying organisms. And so when we say these organisms, we're talking about a species. We're not talking about individual organisms. We're talking about a group, a species. So that would be all certain types of worms, or all the specific types of whales, or humans, or things like that. So in this drawing that I've got here, the leaves are representing these species, and the tree is all living things. On this tree are all living things. Viruses are not here because, as we talked about previously, viruses are not living things, but bacteria are here, plants are here, animals, fungi, protists. There's all the living things that you've ever touched or seen pictures of. They're all on this tree somewhere, and they're organized. Now, you ask the organisms, if the organism could talk, they would not know where they are. This is our understanding. This is our attempt at classifying them. And so over time, by the time maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, there may be a new system, a new way of doing this. When I was growing up, there were not 6 kingdoms. I believe there were 5 kingdoms. And so this is changing as we better understand the organisms. But it does help us group things together for efficiency's sake. So let's talk about a species, or a review about a species. A species is a group of organisms that can produce fertile offspring. So not just offspring, but the offspring needs to be fertile, meaning that it can have babies. So we've talked about it before. A horse and a donkey are 2 separate species, and we know that because if they have a baby, which that's the first hurdle, can they have a baby? If they do have a baby, their babies will not be fertile. They will not be fertile offspring. They will not be able to have a baby that can have babies. Their baby would be called a mule, and mules, generally speaking, are not able to have offspring themselves. So a horse is one species, that would be one leaf, and a donkey would be a nearby leaf because they are similar. They have a lot of similarities, way more than a cow would with them, or a worm, or a mushroom, but they are a different species. And a speciation event is when a new species forms. So we talked about speciation as when organisms are isolated by different things. It could be a river or a mountain or any number of things, but they're isolated, and then the 2 different populations adapt over time, and they become a new species. Well, a speciation event is that event happening, the creation of a new species. When that happens, that's a speciation event. And you may imagine that as if you were a bug climbing up this tree, every time there's a fork in the road where you can go one way or go another, that would be a speciation. That you could see that or view that as a speciation event, because it ends up into thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of different species. All right, so this is the tree of life. We've got different things. We'll refer back to this, I think, in a little bit. But imagine this is the tree of life, and not only is there just one little line of leaves, there's leaves all around this. You would not be able to see this tree, see the different branches with all the leaves that are on there. And so it is with when we classify organisms, there's huge amounts of species, and they would each have their own little end to this tree. And as we go up that tree, if we were going to cut this, if we cut the tree down right here, if we took a chainsaw and cut this, every leaf would die. If I cut the tree off right here, on this right side, then all these large branches above it would also die. But these ones over here would not die. All the leaves would not die that are over here. And the further I get down this tree, if I were to cut that branch off, the fewer and fewer organisms are going to be affected. And if you imagine just kind of taking your finger and breaking off the little twig that's holding on that little leaf, then that would be down very specific to the end of the tree, and we would call that the genus or the species. So transitioning over here to levels of classification, we've got very broad over here. So the domain is going to be, if we were to use this picture over here, each of these large branches would be a domain, and then going specific down here to species, each one of the leaves would be a species. So in the tree of life, there are very few domains, but there's massive amounts of organisms in each domain. And then there are lots of species, that's all the leaves on the tree, but there's only one organism in each one of these. So all worms would be represented by one worm in the species. All killer whales would be represented by one organism here in the species. So as we're up here at the top of the pyramid, it's a large group, very broad. Down here, very small groups. As we get further and further down, there's only one at the bottom, but they're very specific. And the person that we kind of have to thank for some of this is Carl Linnaeus. We'll call him Carl, but or know him as Linnaeus. But he started a new naming system, which we call binomial nomenclature. And that sounds really complicated. If I were to tell you that you have a trinomial nomenclature, that the way that we name each other, or that you're named in the United States, you have a first, middle, and last name, generally speaking, that is a trinomial nomenclature. It is a three-name naming system. That's all that means, is a two-name naming system. And so when we name organisms, we don't have to know domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, all these words all the way down. All we have to know is the last two. So for example, humans would be Homo sapien. Our genus is Homo, and our species is sapien. That's specifically what ours is. A wolf, I believe, is Canis lupus. So they'd be in the genus Canis, and lupus would be its species. So when we say their name, we say the genus and species. And it's typically in Latin or Greek, and the first letter is always capitalized for genus, and then the species is always all lowercase. So for Homo sapien, the only capital would be the H. First name, last name. All right, so we mentioned we mentioned a domain over here, and I used this acronym, this mnemonic device. Did King Philip come over for great spaghetti? You can come up with or look online for all kinds of them, but that's just the one that I use to remember each one of these levels: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So let's talk about two domains, then we'll talk about viruses, which are not on here anyway because they're not living. They're not considered a living organism. So the domain, there's two of them. There's bacteria and there's archaea. Now, we can talk about how frustrating it is that it's named like this. There's a little bit of confusion in these names, or sometimes students have some confusion, but domain bacteria, so that would be bacteria right here on this line. Everything down from here would be considered bacteria. So if we look at the tree here, this is all living things. Well, this branch over here we could represent with bacteria. And bacteria is the domain, and eubacteria is the kingdom. So the domain and kingdom. The domain bacteria only has one kingdom in it. True bacteria is what this means. Eubacteria is going to be a true bacteria. If you think about bacteria, any bacteria you've probably ever heard of is going to be a eubacteria. It's going to be in the kingdom eubacteria. They are asexual. They're prokaryotic, which means, you should know this, they have no nucleus, and they're only single-celled. All of them are single-celled. And the way they get their energy, some of them are autotrophs and some of them are heterotrophs, meaning some of them make their own energy, some of them have to steal their energy from others to get their energy. So when you think about bacteria, this is probably what you're thinking about. And it's its own domain in only one kingdom, Eubacteria. That's compared to this other type of, this other domain that we'll also see the word bacteria in. It is Archaea. So Archaea would be another branch, another large branch. And the kingdom that is Archaea would also be just one. It's going to be Archaebacteria. And Archaea means ancient. So Archaebacteria means ancient bacteria. And it's named that because scientists believe that these were the first organisms that were on Earth. It's very similar to bacteria. They are eubacteria, that kingdom. They're asexual, they're prokaryotic, and they get their energy, some of them from on their own, some of them steal it from others. So a lot of the details are going to be very similar with Archaea and bacteria, eubacteria and Archaebacteria. But these are going to be, Archaea is going to be an extremophile, which means they love extremes, extremophile. They love, some of the main examples that you'll see is that they love hot areas. So think lava pouring into the water under the ocean, and it's extremely hot. There's Archaebacteria that love that area, and there's some places that are so salty other things cannot live, but Archaebacteria, it's fine. Think like Dead Sea. There's so much salt there. We've named it the Dead Sea. There's a lot of salt. They love that. And then methane is a harmful gas. Most organisms can't live there, but Archaebacteria, they love it. So Archaea loves extremes. Archaea, they loves extremes. So that's domain bacteria and Archaebacteria. Let's talk about viruses real quick and we'll be done. Viruses, as a recap, are not considered a living thing. They do not have cells. Well, they do have DNA. That's a requirement. DNA or RNA. They do have DNA or RNA, but they do not have cells to house them in, and they do need a host to reproduce. They cannot reproduce on their own, and so for those two reasons, they are not considered living, even though some characteristics of life they do have, like DNA.